My name is Philip Clayton. I wrote or edited 20 brainy books, and a couple of years ago realized a lot of it was a waste of time, and became an activist. Wrote a mea culpa book, my fault book, called "Transforming Christian Theology for Church and Society," and we're now working to occupy a seminary. We've taken over Claremont School of Theology, and we're going to see how far we can transform it. So stay posted. My title is An Upside Down Politics and an Inside Out Church, Moving Occupy from Tent to Pew. So if you stop to think about it, isn't it a strange thing that a religion spawned by a homeless Jew in the first century could ever have been used to justify privileges, economic and power-wise, for the 1%? Like, what were we thinking? Where did the church go wrong? What does it mean to be Jesus followers, to be people of the way? How could costly discipleship have devolved into the institution known as Christianity in contemporary America? If we're going to even talk about breaking the bond between Christianity and the elite, we have to understand the forces that were and are at work to produce these perversions. And we need to know what are the most effective steps we can take to build a movement that has the best chance to resist these temptations in the future. We have to know that is the church's complicity in economic injustice just a one-time mistake, just a little indiscretion? Or is it rooted in something deeper? That is it a permanent tendency, an almost inevitable falling and failing? To answer those questions, we have to do some theology. So let's start thinking theology out of this political conundrum and out of the core concepts of Christianity. Let's name the imperialist drive in humanity, but let's name it out of a doctrine of sin, a deep enough doctrine of sin, and a doctrine of humanity, what theologians call a theological anthropology. And then let's resist it with kenosis. That is, a theological expression of Occupy is a kenotic ecclesiology. What do I mean by that? Kenosis, think of it this way: the apparently impossible other to anthropology and politics as we know them and live them. The apparently impossible other to anthropology and politics as we know them. So obviously for kenosis, you go to Philippians 2, 4 and following. Have this mind among yourselves, which you have also in Christ Jesus, who, although he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God something to be grasped. Grasping equality with God, the drive to eliminate the capital O other, like claiming yourself equal to it and therefore abolishing it. Next verse, but emptied himself, ekinosens, where we get kenosis from, taking on the form of a servant, becoming one of the 99, in short. Now, I suggest that the same two sides are present in our relationship with every other. It's the same drive to grasp, but now it's power over. So think about it. Aside from sheer physical power over another, like a large man and a small woman, that's a direct form of power, all power over is political. This is the first principle of anthropology. We are the animal that grasps. And we grasp politically. We grasp, hold, and exercise power in groups over groups. The dynamics of power, the mathematics of power, means that there is inevitably a dominant group exercising power over a suppressed group. And this happens in every dimension of human social organizing that we can identify. Is it always 1% versus 99%? No. The percentages vary depending on the economics of production, the form of capitalism, the level and type of technology, the means of communication, et cetera, et cetera. Factors like those determine the form of social organization and hence the relative size of the dominant group and of the marginalized group. They also determine the specific means of oppression, dominance, and control. So, what's the major form of dominance in today's world? It's economic. Friends, the control by late modern global capitalists is as complete, efficient, and overwhelming as any form of social dominance humans have ever invented. You see, it produces willing victims. That's the danger. It produces a sense of freedom on the part of the consumer who's bought by the advertisements. And it produces a systemic, unstoppable power with global reach. I'm not exaggerating. This is the control by the 1%. So please don't dichotomize sin and the secular. What I just said was not politics and therefore not religion. What I just said was a doctrine of sin. If you can think those two together, you can have the starting point to occupy the church. If you can't think them together, you've got a dichotomy that's going to take down this conversation at the outset. So, what's the message for the church? Paul warns the church not to lord it over the Gentiles, seeing and expecting the same dynamic in the church that we see in the world. Now, if forming dominant groups and exercising power over other groups in humans is as deep in human nature as I've argued, is it surprising that it's going to rear its ugly head in the church as well? Are you surprised? Why do Christians have such a hard time acknowledging this point? Why do we want to privatize sin? Why do Christians often seem to be the most naive about human nature, despite the fact of having a bloody good doctrine of sin to work with? I almost think it's willful ignorance. You see, we think we can only achieve spiritual growth and community if we deny all these secular dynamics. Nearer my soul to thee. If we look away from the secular, then we can find God. But you see, by denying dominance, we actually allow even more virulent expressions of it. It's kind of what we do with sexuality as well, but that's another topic. Okay. So because we live in denial, then we're surprised when a church divides, a pastor is ousted, a bishop builds an empire. Here's the problem. Denying, putting our head in the sand, makes us complicit. There's sin again, in case you missed it. Especially in the actual social and political roles that churches play. You see, American churches are the primary supporters of American empire, which means the primary supporters of the global dominance of the 1%. Guys, it's us. So what do? 3 starting points. 1, acknowledge the church's turn to empire already by the 4th century. Back to Constantine. Brian McLaren does a beautiful job of describing it in A New Kind of Christianity. We have to own our history. And friends, it's a dark one. 2nd, switch from a theology of dominance to a theology of kenosis. Switch from Christus Victor, Christ the victor, us riding in the white horse, because after all, we're the right ones. We are the good guys, and they are, after all, the bad guys. To a theology of kenosis. When you read that passage in Philippians 2, own verses 5 to 8. And please leave 9 to 11. Therefore, God has highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name, to those who are really suffering. It's written for them. It was written for the one who became obedient unto death, even death on a cross. Why are we in middle-class churches owning 9 to 11 and hitting Jewish and Muslim friends over the head with it? So, what does this all mean? Go back to an upside-down politics and an inside-out church. 2 of the most beautiful passages have been mentioned in this discussion today. What are the 4 things that Jesus said he was brought to proclaim? Freedom for the prisoners, recovery of sight for the blind. Think of all the verses, the meanings of blind. To release the oppressed, what could be clearer than that? And to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And who spoke the great words of the topsy-turvy God? A pregnant Jewish female, pregnant out of wedlock. Friends, it doesn't get lower than that in that culture. Who can say he has brought down rulers from their thrones, but has lifted up the humble? He has filled the hungry with good things, but has sent the rich away empty. An inside-out church means you knock down the walls. A couple things happen. First, when you knock down the walls, the roof falls off. When the walls are gone and the roof are gone, you are homeless. A home is 4 walls and a roof. Make the church homeless. That's how you occupy the church. You got to get outside the walls. If you're not outside the walls, I keep telling congregations, more than 50% of your church activities time, you're occupying a building. You're not occupying a movement, right? And then when you knock down the words and you're sitting there with a hymnal, knock down the walls, and you're sitting there with a hymnal in your hands, folks start looking at you. It's kind of like you look back and they look at you and you go, hi. And they go, hi. And you kind of figure you should put the book down and you say, do you want to have a cup of coffee? And it kind of starts there, the way that Rita beautifully described it a few minutes ago. So here's the choice, and with this I have to close. Will we choose churches? Will you choose your church as a supporter of the establishment? Or will you remake it as a revolutionary cell? We have a revolutionary Messiah. Why can't it be a revolutionary cell? See, it's kind of the Occupy version of the mustard seed conspiracy. We can go with that one, right? They used to call it disestablishmentarianism, but I want to give that word a completely different move. Let's disestablish the church. Whoa, that's a thought. It's going to call for whole new forms of organization, especially after you knock down the damn walls and the roof falls down, right? Right? It's going to take cohorts. It's going to take intentional communities. It's going to take neo-monasticism. It's going to take voluntary poverty. It's going to take spending Christmas Eve under a bridge with Rita and Arshay Mabrak. It's going to take study groups. It's going to take some guts. In closing, remember, the elite will always try to take over. That's what we know from theological anthropology and the doctrine of sin. The elite you will always have with you. But we mustn't get confused whose side we're on. It's not black and white. If you're a pastor or a church member, it's not going to be obvious how to occupy Corning, Iowa. And yet, you have to act. You're acting. One way or the other, you're taking a side. So don't tell me it's not black and white. Have some guts, take some faith, and step out. Act in risk and in authenticity and in obedience in your church. Thanks very much.
To me, I think that there's something we have to do as those who are part of an academy who train the ministers. That we need to begin this confession.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm going to make you do it.
Speaking of confessions, Augustine calls it concupiscencia, concupiscence. We have so many ways to fall in love with ourselves. Wealth is one, and power is one, and, that new Mercedes is one, right? In theological education, we fell in love with ourselves by falling in love with our academic prestige. The paper that no one in the room can understand. Tillich's extensive use of Heidegger was an attempt to surmount this ontological problem, right? And canonic theological education is education for the 99%. We educated our leaders, which means our pastors, to be the elite 1% of knowledge. They're the knowledge kings and queens, right? And so we cut out their tongues. I called it liberal laryngitis. Sort of cut out their tongues. They have this beautiful calling to come in and transform the world through ministry to God, through the church. And by the time they left the seminary, they weren't sure what they believed. And out they wandered, and they spent the next 25 years recovering, and 3 congregations might go under in the meantime, right? So if we get the pride out of theological education, We know who we serve from the beginning. Choose this day who you will serve. Trip, that would be my answer to what theological education has to decide.